It was an ordinary morning, until a farmer in a straw hat and dusty boots asked to transfer $15 million. The manager burst out laughing and mocked him. "If you've got the balance, I'll pay you double." But no one had any idea who was truly behind that simple man. Now listen here, y'all, because what I'm about to tell you is going to shake you to your core. Picture this: a bright Tuesday morning at First National Bank downtown, all marble floors gleaming like mirrors, and fancy folks sipping their designer coffee. Harold Thompson, 68 years old, walks through those glass doors wearing his old straw hat, faded plaid shirt and boots that have seen more dirt than a farmer's field, that plastic watch on his wrist, 20 years old and still ticking. The whispers started immediately. "Oh my God, look at him," one lady in designer heels muttered. The receptionists behind their polished desks couldn't help but giggle, covering their mouths like schoolgirls. Harold approached the counter, calm as still water. "I need to transfer $15 million, please." The lobby went dead silent. Then, Edward Miller, the 35-year-old branch manager in his $1,000 Italian suit, burst into laughter so loud it echoed off those marble walls. "If you have that balance," Edward sneered, adjusting his silk tie, "I'll pay you double." The entire lobby erupted. Susan, the head teller, covered her mouth in shock. Other clients started making jokes, their laughter mixing with the hum of air conditioning. But Harold just stood there, patient as a mountain, watching them all laugh at the wrong man. What none of them knew was that this humble-looking farmer was about to turn their world upside down. But let me tell you how this all started, honey. Harold Thompson wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. No, sir. He grew up dirt poor, son of farmhands who worked from sunrise to sundown just to put beans on the table. Picture little Harold, barefoot as the day he was born, walking 3 miles to that one-room schoolhouse every morning. While other kids his age were out playing marbles and chasing fireflies, Harold was reading everything he could get his hands on. Food labels, old newspapers his mama brought home from town, borrowed books that were falling apart at the seams. His mama would sit by that old kerosene lamp late into the night, sewing patches on worn-out clothes, her fingers working magic to make their little bit stretch. Harold would watch her, seeing the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she'd rub her back after hours hunched over that needle. "That boy's got a gift from God," his teacher, Mrs. Margaret Jenkins, used to say. "Harold sees things different than other children. He's going to do something special with his life, mark my words." When Harold turned 15, something inside him just couldn't take it anymore. The poverty, the helplessness, watching his parents work themselves to the bone for pennies. So he made a decision that would change everything. He hitchhiked to the big city with nothing but the clothes on his back and $50 his mama had hidden in a mason jar. That first night in the city, sleeping in a tiny shared room that smelled like sweat and broken dreams, Harold looked at himself in a cracked mirror and made a promise. "I'll rise from poverty, but I'll never forget where I came from." Who could have imagined that boy would one day own the very bank where they're laughing at him now? Before we continue this emotional story, put in the comments below which city you're watching from. It'll be a pleasure to give your comment a little heart. Now let's continue this exciting story. Now here's where Harold's story gets real interesting, y'all. That 15-year-old boy with dirt under his fingernails turned into a young man with calloused hands and big dreams. By day, he worked construction, learning to lay brick and stone with precision that amazed his bosses. But at night, oh honey, that's when the magic happened. Harold would come home covered in dust and cement, his back aching something fierce, but he'd wash up and crack open those accounting books, hour after hour, studying by lamplight just like his mama used to sew. Some nights, he'd only get 3 hours of sleep, but that fire inside him wouldn't let him quit. Every penny Harold earned he squeezed until it screamed. While other young men were out drinking and chasing girls, Harold was living on peanut butter sandwiches and saving every dollar he could. Then came the day that changed everything. Harold took his entire paycheck, $250, and walked into a broker's office. "I want 10 shares of Lone Star Oil Company," he said, his hands shaking but his voice steady. That's when he met Mary Ellen at the diner across the street, celebrating his first investment with a cup of coffee he couldn't really afford. She was an elementary school teacher with kind eyes and a gentle smile. When Harold told her about his dreams, most folks would have laughed. But Mary Ellen? She saw something special. "We're gonna eat a lot of beans and rice," Harold warned her when they got married 6 months later. "That's all right, honey," Mary Ellen said, squeezing his rough hands. "It's not only for us, it's to prove that ordinary folks can win too." Could that modest investment become the foundation of an empire that would shock everyone in that marble bank? Now get this, folks. That little oil investment started paying off big time. Harold and Mary Ellen watched their nest egg grow, but they didn't change their ways one bit. Still lived in that tiny apartment, still ate beans and rice most nights. Then came the opportunity that would change everything. The old Henderson farm, 500 acres of what everyone called worthless dirt, was going up for auction. The family couldn't pay their debts, and neighbors whispered it was cursed land. Harold saw something different. He'd drive out there on Sundays after church service, walking those fields with Mary Ellen, studying the soil, the water flow, the possibilities. When auction day came, Harold bid every dollar they had saved, $15,000, and won that land. Tayo just threw our money away, folks said, but Harold rolled up his sleeves and got to work. He introduced crop rotation, improved the cattle breeding, planted diverse crops that flourished in that cursed soil. Within 3 years, those same neighbors who'd laughed were knocking on his door asking for advice. Harold kept expanding, solid stocks, rental properties in town, high-yield bonds when interest rates were good, but success never changed who he was. If you were decent when poor, you'll be decent when rich, he'd tell Mary Ellen. If you were cruel when poor, money will only make it clearer. The biggest move came when First National Bank was struggling. Harold quietly bought 30%, then more shares as others sold cheap. He focused on helping small farmers and entrepreneurs, folks just like he used to be. Years passed, and Harold became the main shareholder. But here's the thing that'll blow your mind. He chose to stay invisible. Still wore that old straw hat, still drove his beat-up truck. Why would a man who owned the bank prefer to hide behind humble clothes? Now here's where things get real ugly, folks. Edward Miller wasn't done with his little show. Oh no, he was just getting warmed up. He slammed a stack of papers on the counter so hard it made the pens jump. "You want to transfer 15 million? Edward sneered, straightening his expensive tie. "Then you're going to fill out all 17 of these forms. Every single one. And I need 5 years of tax documents, bank statements, and proof of income. You got 48 hours to get it all together." The crowd was eating it up like it was dinner theater. Susan, the head teller, covered her mouth trying not to laugh out loud. Mark, the security guard, shook his head like he was watching a comedy show. Then the fancy customers started chiming in. Robert Miller, some big-shot businessman in a three-piece suit, chuckled and said, "Maybe you should try the Farmers Credit Union down the street, old-timer." Patricia White, dripping in jewelry and attitude, added with a smirk, "Yes, they might be more understanding of your situation." Dr. Charles Green, looking all-important with his medical badge, nodded agreement. Some institutions are better suited for different types of clients. Only one person in that whole place showed any decency. Anna, a young clerk barely out of college, stepped forward timidly. Mr. Miller, maybe we could make an exception. I mean, Anna!" Edward snapped. "Get back to your desk. This doesn't concern you." Harold just stood there, calm as Sunday morning, letting them pile on the humiliation. Finally, he spoke real quiet-like. "Funny thing is, just last week I transferred 20 million through this very bank. Didn't need a single form then." The laughter died down a little. Something in Harold's voice made them all wonder. Was this humble farmer about to show them cards they never saw coming? Now, here's where Harold Thompson did something that nobody, and I mean nobody, saw coming. Instead of getting angry or walking away with his tail between his legs like they all expected, Harold did something that made the whole bank go dead quiet. He walked over to that fancy VIP lounge, you know, the one with the leather chairs and crystal water glasses that's reserved for the bank's most important clients. Harold sat down real comfortable-like, crossed his legs, and adjusted that old straw hat of his. "I'll wait for the regional director," he said, "calm as you please. Y'all can call Richard Henderson and tell him Harold's here." The silence that fell over that marble lobby was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Edward Miller's face went from smug satisfaction to something that looked an awful lot like confusion. Susan stopped shuffling her papers and just stared. Mark, the security guard, shifted nervously by the door. Even those fancy customers, Robert Miller, Patricia White, and Dr. Green, stopped their chattering and started glancing at each other, like they were suddenly wondering if they'd missed something important. There was Harold sitting in that VIP chair like he belonged there, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. That worn plaid shirt and dusty boots didn't look so out of place anymore. Somehow, that humble farmer had transformed the whole atmosphere just by sitting down and speaking a name. "Richard Henderson?" Edward stammered, his voice cracking just a little. "You mean, you know Mr. Henderson personally?" Harold just smiled that quiet smile of his and tapped his old plastic watch. Been knowing Richard for 23 years. I reckon he'll want to hear about how his staff treats folks. Who was this man who could change the entire mood of a bank just by mentioning one name? Y'all ain't gonna believe what happened next. Edward Miller was standing there looking like a fish out of water when his phone started buzzing. The caller ID made his face go white as a sheet. It was Richard Henderson, the regional director himself. "Edward Miller speaking," he answered, trying to sound professional, but his voice was shaking like a leaf in a storm. What came through that phone made everyone in earshot freeze up. Even from where Harold was sitting, you could hear the director's voice booming through the speaker. "Edward, I just got word that Harold Thompson is at your branch. You will treat that man with the absolute highest respect. Do you understand me? Whatever he needs, you make it happen. Right now." Edward's face went from white to green to something that looked like he was going to be sick all over that marble floor. "Yes, sir, Mr. Henderson. Of course, sir. But here's the part that really knocked everyone's socks off." Harold stood up from that leather chair, walked over calm as Sunday morning and said, "Edward, let me talk to Richard." The way Harold said Richard, not Mr. Henderson or sir, but Richard like they were old fishing buddies, made the whole lobby go dead silent again. "Richard," Harold said into the phone, "your boy here's been putting on quite a show, got me filling out 17 forms like I'm some kind of stranger." The response from the other end was so loud everyone could hear it. "Harold, I am so sorry. This is completely unacceptable." That's when Susan, the head teller, burst into tears, just started crying right there behind her fancy desk. Linda, the young intern who'd been watching from the back, stood there with her mouth hanging open like she'd seen a ghost. Mark, the security guard, found himself a corner to hide in, looking ashamed as could be. Only Anna, that sweet young clerk, had the courage to whisper what everyone was thinking. Respect shouldn't depend on knowing who the person is. If the regional director himself was taking orders from Harold, what in heaven's name was left to uncover about this humble farmer? Now here comes the moment that's going to knock your socks clean off, folks. Harold reached into that worn jacket of his and pulled out a tablet. Not some fancy new model, just a simple device that looked as humble as everything else about him. "Edward," Harold said, his voice steady as a rock, "I think it's time you understood exactly who you've been making fun of today." He tapped that screen, and what showed up made Edward Miller's knees go weak. Official documents, certified statements, audited reports, all showing that Harold Thompson owned 43% of First National Bank. Not some small shares, not a minor investment, but controlling interest in the very institution where they'd been humiliating him. Edward started trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. His expensive suit suddenly felt too tight, his silk tie like a noose around his neck. "Mr. Thompson, I had no idea." Susan gasped so loud it echoed off those marble walls. Her face went white as fresh snow, and she had to grab onto her desk to keep from falling over. But the real shock came when Harold started explaining why he was there in the first place. "Over the past year," he said, calm as Sunday morning, "I've received more than 800 letters from folks, farmers, small business owners, elderly people, young families, all telling me how they've been treated in this very building." Patricia White, that socialite dripping in jewelry, felt like the ground was crumbling beneath her designer heels. Dr. Green, who'd been so quick to suggest the Farmers' Credit Union, swallowed hard and looked like he wanted to disappear into the marble floor. 800 letters, Harold repeated, letting that number sink in. 800 good people who came here seeking help and left feeling smaller than when they walked in. The silence in that lobby was deafening. Everyone was staring at this humble man in his straw hat, realizing they'd just witnessed the most powerful person in the building get treated like dirt. Now that the truth was out, would Harold seek his revenge? Or was he planning something bigger than anyone could imagine? Now here's where Harold Thompson showed the world what real leadership looks like. Instead of screaming or seeking revenge, he did something that changed that bank forever. "Anna," Harold called to that sweet young clerk who'd tried to help him earlier. "Come here, honey." Anna walked over, still shaking from everything she'd witnessed. Harold looked her right in the eyes and said, "You're going to be the new regional manager. Someone with your heart deserves to lead this place." The gasps echoed through that marble lobby. Anna started crying tears of joy and disbelief. Then Harold turned to Edward, who was still trembling like a scared child. "Edward, you're done here. Clean out your desk." He looked at Sandra, the supervisor who'd been snickering in the background. "You too, Sandra. Both of you need to learn what it means to treat people with dignity." But Harold wasn't finished. He walked over to Robert Miller, Patricia White, and Dr. Green, those fancy customers who'd been so quick to mock him. "Y'all think money makes you better than other folks. Well, let me tell you something. Character can't be bought with a credit card." Even Mark, the security guard, stepped forward with tears in his eyes. "Mr. Thompson, I'm so sorry. I was wrong to laugh at you. Please forgive me." Harold nodded. "That takes courage, Mark. You can stay." 6 months later, that bank was transformed. A new plaque by the front door read, "Here every person is welcome regardless of how they dress or how much they have." Harold started financial education classes for struggling families, microloans for small businesses, and priority service for seniors and folks with disabilities. Linda, that young intern, learned the most important lesson of her life. Respect comes from decency, not from what you can gain. Edward lost everything: his job, his fancy apartment, his pride. But eventually, he found Harold and begged for forgiveness, starting over with true humility. Patricia became a social outcast until she discovered redemption through volunteer work. Dr. Green began offering free medical services to those who couldn't afford care. The question remained, would these changes last, or would old habits return when memories faded? 1 year later, Harold Thompson decided to put his transformed bank to the ultimate test. He dressed even more humbly than before: torn overalls, muddy work boots, a baseball cap instead of his straw hat. He walked into First National looking like he'd just finished feeding cattle at dawn. But this time something beautiful happened. Anna, now the regional manager, greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning, sir. How can we help you today?" No judgment, no whispers, just genuine kindness. Linda, who'd learned her lesson well, offered him coffee and a comfortable chair. "Take your time, sir. We're here to serve you." Even the new customers in the lobby, folks who didn't know Harold from Adam, treated him with basic human decency. The culture had truly changed. Harold completed his business quietly and left with a heart full of joy. The transformation wasn't just about rules and policies, it had become the soul of that place. That evening, Harold sat on his front porch with Mary Ellen, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold. She'd been by his side through every struggle, every triumph, every moment of this incredible journey. "Was it worth it, honey?" Mary Ellen asked, her weathered hand finding his. "All that humiliation, all that pain, just to teach them a lesson?" Harold smiled, that same quiet smile that had carried him through 68 years of life. "More than worth it, sweetheart. We proved something important. The world can change, one person at a time, one heart at a time." He squeezed her hand gently. "True wealth ain't about the money in your bank account. It's about the lives you can touch, the people you can lift up, the kindness you can spread." As the stars began to twinkle above their modest home, Harold reflected on a life well lived, not because of the millions he'd earned, but because of the difference he'd made. Now I ask you, friend, would you have laughed at Harold that day, or would you have treated him with dignity? What would you do if you discovered you'd humiliated someone who could change your life forever? The choice is yours.